My son was smiling when he said it. Not the kind of smile you give your mom. The kind you give when you think you're the smartest person in the room. Mom, you really shouldn't be messing with money. You don't understand. We were halfway through Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, the whole thing laid out like every year. My daughter-in-law, Brittany, laughed softly like it was just a harmless joke. Jason didn't even look at me when he said it. He was still scrolling through something on his phone, shaking his head like I'd just done something irresponsible. I didn't answer right away. I'd learned that silence usually made things shorter. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't even think about it, just a quick glance. A habit from years of handling bills, emails, reminders. It was a message from my financial advisor. The preview line showed a number, a big one. I would have locked the screen. I should have. But Jason leaned over. He had always done that. Ever since he was a teenager, looking over my shoulder like everything in my life needed review. "Ooh, what's this?" he said, his voice light, amused. "You investing now?" Brittany smiled. "That's actually great, Linda. It's good to stay engaged." Jason squinted at my screen. "Just don't go throwing your retirement money into something risky." I turned the phone slightly away, but it was too late. His voice changed. "Wait." That one word cut through the table louder than anything else that night. He leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. "That doesn't say 2,000. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. Jason sat up straighter now, no longer relaxed, no longer joking. "That says 2 million. The table went quiet. Not dramatic, not loud, just that sudden uncomfortable kind of quiet where everyone pretends they didn't hear something, but they definitely did. Jason looked at me like he was trying to solve a problem that didn't make sense. "What is that?" he asked. I set my phone face down on the table. "It's just something I'm reviewing," I said. That should have been enough. It wasn't. He leaned back in his chair, studying me now, really looking at me in a way he hadn't in years. "No," he said slowly. "That's not just something." Brittany shifted beside him. "Jason." "No, hold on," he said, raising a hand slightly. "Mom, what is that number?" There it was. Not concern, not curiosity. Control. I picked up my glass of water, took a small sip, and set it back down. "It's an investment opportunity," I said. Jason let out a short laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. "An investment for $2 million. A few seconds passed. I could feel everyone waiting for me to correct him, to laugh, to explain that he'd read it wrong. I didn't. He leaned forward again, this time resting his elbows on the table. "Where would you even get that kind of money?" That question hung there longer than anything else. Not because of the number, because of what it meant. Jason had spent years assuming he knew exactly where I stood, what I had, what I needed, what I was capable of. And now something didn't fit. Brittany looked between us. Maybe it's just a typo or something. Jason didn't take his eyes off me. "Is it?" I could feel the weight of the moment shifting, but not in a loud, explosive way. More like something quiet breaking apart. "I don't think this is the right time," I said. Jason sat back again, but this time his posture was different, tighter, alert. "No, I think it is," he replied. "Because if you're making decisions like this, I should know about it." There it was again. Not "I'd like to understand." I should know. I folded my hands in my lap under the table. "You don't need to know everything I do," I said. That landed harder than I expected. Jason blinked like I'd just said something out of character. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting slightly like he was trying to bring things back under control. "I'm just trying to help you. That's what I've always done." I didn't answer that, because that part was true. At least that's how it had started. Years ago, after my husband passed, Jason had stepped in. At first, it was small things. Offering to look over bills, making suggestions about savings, helping me understand paperwork I didn't want to deal with alone. It had felt like support. Then it became something else. But sitting there at that table with everyone watching, Jason wasn't thinking about any of that. He was trying to reconcile one simple problem. How did his mother, who he believed needed his guidance, end up in a position to casually review a $2 million investment? He shook his head slightly, almost to himself. "This doesn't make sense," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. He wasn't upset yet. He was confused, which meant he still believed there was an explanation that would put everything back where it belonged, where I belonged. I picked up my fork again, cutting into my food like nothing had changed. "It makes sense," I said calmly. Jason watched me closely. "No," he said, quieter now. "It really doesn't." I kept my eyes on my plate even though I could feel Jason watching me. That look wasn't new. I'd seen it before, just not this intense, like he was trying to reevaluate something he thought he had already figured out. "I'm serious, Mom," he said, quieter now, but more focused. "We should probably talk about this." We should. That phrase always sounded harmless, reasonable, responsible. But it never meant what it sounded like. It meant he would talk and I would listen. "I'm fine," I said. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't sharp, just simple. Jason leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. That was new. He usually didn't push this hard in front of other people. Brittany gave him a quick look the kind couples give each other when they're deciding whether to keep going or back off. He ignored it. You don't have to handle everything alone, he said. That almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. It hadn't always sounded like control. Years ago after my husband passed, it had sounded like help. Back then I was overwhelmed. Not dramatically, just quietly. There were things my husband had always taken care of: taxes, insurance, paperwork, retirement accounts. I understood the basics, but he had handled the details. Jason had stepped in without being asked. Let me take a look at this, Mom, he said one afternoon sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of envelopes. You don't need to stress over it. At the time I was grateful. He organized my bills, set up online payments, explained things in a way that made sense. He even caught a small error on a statement that saved me a few $100s. It felt like support, and for a while it was. Then the language changed. Did you really need to spend this much on repairs? Why are you still keeping this account open? You should consolidate this. It's inefficient. It was never aggressive, never outright disrespectful, just constant. And slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, something shifted. He stopped asking what I wanted, and I stopped offering. At first, I told myself it was easier this way. Jason was good with numbers, that's what he did. Real estate financing negotiations. He talked about deals and returns and market trends like it was second nature. I had spent most of my life doing bookkeeping for small businesses. Quiet work, accurate, consistent, but never impressive. At least that's how it was seen. So when Jason said things like, "Trust me, Mom, this is a smarter move," I let him. Not because I couldn't understand, but because I didn't feel like arguing. That's how it happens. Not all at once. Just small decisions one after another. Until one day you realize you're explaining your own life like it needs approval. Have you thought about selling the house? Jason asked one Sunday, standing in my living room, looking around like he was evaluating a property. It's a lot to maintain, Brittany added, sitting on the couch. Something smaller might make more sense. I remember standing there holding a cup of coffee, trying to understand why that suggestion felt heavier than it sounded. This is my home, I said. Jason nodded, but it was an agreement. I get that, he said. But it's also an asset. You have to think about the long term. The long term. He said it like I hadn't lived through decades of it already. That conversation didn't turn into an argument. It turned into something quieter. A pattern. Every decision became a discussion. Every discussion leaned in one direction. And every time I hesitated, Jason filled the space. I'm just trying to make sure you're okay, he would say. And I believed him. At least I believed that he believed it. That's what made it harder to push back. Because there was no clear moment where help became control. It just became... Back at the table, Jason was still watching me. You know I'm only looking out for you, he said. I nodded slightly. I know, and I did. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, looking out for me had turned into deciding for me. And I had let it happen. Not because I couldn't stop it, but because I didn't think it mattered enough to fight. Jason exhaled like he was trying to reset the conversation. Look, he said, leaning forward again, lowering his voice. If you're dealing with numbers like that, we need to go over everything. Just to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. There it was. The assumption that if something didn't make sense to him, it had to be wrong. Or worse, that I didn't understand it. I picked up my napkin, folding it slowly in my hands. I'm not being taken advantage of, I said. Jason gave a small, tight smile. That's exactly what people say when they are... Brittany shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now, but still not stepping in. The rest of the table stayed quiet. No one wanted to be in the middle of this. Jason tapped his fingers lightly against the table. So where is this coming from, he asked. This investment. Who are you working with? I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't just trying to understand. He was trying to reassert something. Something he felt slipping. It's handled, I said. Jason's jaw tightened just slightly. That's not an answer. No, I said calmly, it's the only one you need. That was the moment the air changed. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't adjusting my response to make him comfortable. And he didn't know what to do with that. I set my napkin down and reached for my glass again, mostly to give my hand something to do. Jason didn't say anything right away this time. He just watched me like he was trying to decide whether I was being difficult or just confused. That used to be enough to make me explain myself. It didn't anymore. But it hadn't always been like that. Most of it never sounded like an insult. That's what made it hard to push back. It came out in small comments, casual observations, the kind that didn't leave anything solid to argue against. Mom, you're still using that bank. Their fees are terrible. You really should automate this stuff. It's not 1995. You don't want to fall behind on this kind of thing. Each one sounded reasonable on its own, helpful even. But over time they stacked. And eventually it stopped feeling like advice. It felt like correction. I remember one afternoon when Jason came over unannounced. He walked straight into the kitchen, set his keys down, and opened my laptop without asking. I just want to check something real quick, he said. I stood there for a second watching him type like it was his. What are you doing? I asked. Making sure your accounts are set up properly, he replied, not even looking up. You've got things spread out all over the place. They've always been like that, I said. Yeah, and it's inefficient. He clicked through tabs, scanning balances, muttering under his breath like he was reviewing a client's portfolio. That was the first time it felt off. Not wrong, just off. You know, he added if something happened, it would be a mess to sort this out. Something happened. He said it so casually, like the only logical outcome of me handling my own finances was eventually failing at it. I'm managing just fine, I said. Jason nodded, but it was the kind of nod that didn't actually agree. I know you think that, he said. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Not because it was loud, because it was quiet and final. Brittany had her own way of saying things. Softer, warmer, easier to accept at first. She would sit with me at the table, scrolling through listings on her phone. Look at this one, she'd say. It's smaller, but it's beautiful and way easier to maintain. I would glance at the screen polite. It's nice, I'd say. You wouldn't have to worry about the yard, she'd continue, or repairs. It's just simpler. Simpler. That word came up a lot. Not once did she say I couldn't handle my house. She didn't need to. The implication was always there. You've done so much already, she said one time, placing a hand lightly in mine. At this stage, it's okay to let things be easier. At this stage, I knew what she meant, even if she never said it directly. I wasn't young anymore. I wasn't supposed to be starting anything new. I was supposed to be scaling down, letting go, depending more. That was the role they were preparing for me. And for a while, I stepped into it without realizing. I started asking Jason before making decisions. Not big ones, small ones. Do you think I should fix the roof this year or wait? Is it better to keep this account or move it? Should I be doing something different with my savings? Each time he answered quickly, confidently. Each time I felt a little less certain about my own instincts. Until eventually I stopped asking myself first. That's the part no one sees. There's no argument, no moment where someone takes control. You just hand it over, one decision at a time. I remember standing in my own living room one evening holding an estimate for a repair. It wasn't cheap, but it was necessary. Jason looked it over and shook his head. This doesn't make financial sense, he said. It needs to be fixed, I replied. Or he countered, you take that money and put it somewhere that actually grows. You're thinking short term. Short term. Fixing your own house was now considered short term. I looked around the room. The same walls, the same furniture, the same place I had lived in for decades. This is where I live, I said. Jason sighed like I was missing the point. That's exactly why you need to think bigger. Bigger. That word didn't mean what it sounded like either. It didn't mean opportunity. It meant stepping away from what was mine, trading control for efficiency. I'll think about it, I said. And I did. Not because I agreed. Because I had gotten used to second-guessing myself. Back at the table, Jason shifted in his seat, clearly unsettled now. You're being very vague, he said. I'm being clear, I replied. No, you're avoiding the question. I met his eyes. No, Jason, I said evenly. I'm choosing not to answer it. That was new. Not just for him. For me. Brittany looked down at her plate, pretending to focus on her food. The rest of the table stayed quiet. Jason let out a breath through his nose like he was trying to stay calm. This isn't about control, he said. This is about making sure you're not making a mistake. There it was again. The assumption that I was one step away from getting it wrong. That if I didn't explain myself, it meant I didn't understand what I was doing. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I'm not making a mistake, I said. Jason stared at me for a second longer than usual. Then he shook his head. I don't think you realize how serious this is, he said. And for the first time, I noticed something underneath his tone. Not just frustration, not just confusion, something closer to disbelief. Like the version of me he had built in his mind was starting to crack and he didn't know how to put it back together. I pushed my plate slightly away, not because I was done eating, but because I wasn't hungry anymore. Jason was still looking at me like I'd just stepped out of character, like I had skipped a line in a script he thought he knew by heart. He didn't understand where this was coming from. That made sense, because he had never seen the part of my life where things actually started to change. It didn't happen all at once. It started with a phone call I almost didn't take. An old co-worker, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, called me one afternoon. We had worked together doing bookkeeping for a small construction company back when I was still working full-time. Hey, Linda, she said, her voice a little rushed. I know this is out of the blue, but I've got a friend who runs a small company in Chicago. They're a bit of a mess on the financial side. I told her about you. I almost said no, not because I couldn't do it, Because I didn't see the point. At that stage of my life, I wasn't looking for something new. I wasn't trying to build anything. I was just maintaining. What kind of work, I asked. Bookkeeping, mostly. Cleaning up accounts. Maybe setting up better systems. It's part-time, flexible. That word again, flexible. It sounded manageable. So I agreed to meet. That's how I met Eleanor Reed. She didn't run her company, like Jason ran his meetings. There were no polished presentations, no buzzwords, no rehearsed confidence. Her office was small, not messy, but not curated either. Papers stacked where they needed to be, not where they looked good. She didn't ask me about my age. She didn't ask me why I hadn't done something bigger with my career. She asked me one thing. Can you fix this? She turned her laptop toward me. Spreadsheets, incomplete records, numbers that didn't line up, expenses without clear tracking. It wasn't impressive. It was familiar. Yes, I said. She nodded once. Good, she replied, because I don't need someone to explain the problem. I need someone who can actually deal with it. That was the entire interview. I started the following week. At first, it was just a few hours here and there, logging transactions, organizing accounts, making sure payroll didn't fall behind. But it didn't take long to see what was happening. The company wasn't failing. It just didn't have structure. Eleanor knew what she was building. The product division, that part was clear. But the numbers, the systems, that was where things slipped. And that's where I worked best. Quietly, consistently, without needing attention. I set up processes, cleaned up reporting, made it easier to see where money was going and why. Eleanor noticed, not in a dramatic way. She just started asking for my input before making decisions. Does this make sense? She'd ask, pointing at a budget. Is this sustainable? No one had asked me those kinds of questions in a long time. Not in a way that meant they actually wanted the answer. Months passed. Then one afternoon, she called me into her office. I need to be honest with you, she said. We're running tight on cash. I nodded. I already knew. I can keep paying you what I've been paying, she continued, but it's not what you're worth, and I don't know how long I can even guarantee that. She paused, watching my reaction. I didn't have one. I had seen businesses go through this before. Okay, I said. But she added, I can offer something else. She slid a document across the desk. Equity. A small percentage, nothing that looked significant on paper. I can't promise it'll be worth anything, she said. Most startups don't make it. You know that. I did. More than she realized. But if we do, she continued, I want the people who actually built this to be part of it. I looked at the document, then back at her. Jason would have had a list of questions. He would have analyzed risk, probability, return. I didn't. Not because I didn't understand those things. Because I understood something else. This wasn't about a guaranteed outcome. It was about whether I believed in the work. I'll take it, I said. Eleanor nodded like that was the answer she expected. All right, she said. Then you're not just helping us anymore. You're part of it. That was the first time in years I felt like I wasn't being managed. I was being trusted. The work didn't change overnight. It got harder. More responsibility. More decisions. More late evenings going over numbers that had real consequences. But I didn't mind, because no one was standing over my shoulder. No one was correcting me. No one was explaining my own job to me. Back at the Thanksgiving table, Jason was still waiting, still trying to connect something he didn't understand. You're not answering the question, he said again. I glanced at him, then back down at the table. I already did, I replied. He shook his head, frustrated now. No, you didn't. I folded my hands again, calm. Yes, I said. You just didn't like the answer. That wasn't defiance. It wasn't anger. It was just the truth. And for someone who had spent years expecting to be the one giving direction, that was harder to deal with than anything else. I picked up my fork again, more out of habit than hunger, and cut into the same piece of turkey I hadn't touched. Jason let out a quiet breath, like he was trying to stay patient. That was new too. He was used to conversations ending quickly once he explained something. This one wasn't. You're acting like this isn't a big deal, he said. It isn't, I replied. That wasn't entirely true. It just wasn't the kind of big deal he was expecting. Because the part he was reacting to, the number, wasn't where this actually started. It had started years earlier. In small, quiet decisions no one else noticed. After I accepted the equity, nothing changed on the outside. That was important. I still lived in the same house, drove the same car, paid the same bills the same way. Jason didn't question any of it. Why would he? From his point of view, nothing had improved. If anything, he probably thought I was being more careful with money than before. And in a way I was, just not in the way he assumed. Clearview didn't suddenly become successful overnight. There were long stretches where it barely felt like progress at all. Some months were tight. Expenses came in faster than revenue. Clients delayed payments. Projections had to be adjusted. I kept working through it, balancing books, reviewing reports, catching things before they became problems. Eleanor didn't hover. She didn't double-check everything I did. She trusted me to handle it. That changed the way I worked. Not faster, better, more deliberate, because the decision mattered, not just for the company. For me, there were moments where I could have stepped back, taken less risk, asked for more guaranteed pay instead of ownership. Jason would have done that. He would have framed it as being smart. But I understood something he didn't. Guaranteed pay keeps things stable. Ownership changes where you stand. That difference doesn't show right away. It builds, slowly, quietly. The first time Eleanor mentioned bringing in outside investment, I reviewed every number twice. Not because I didn't trust her, because I needed to understand exactly what it meant for my share. I wasn't just tracking expenses anymore. I was protecting something, and that required a different mindset. Around that time, Jason came over one afternoon and noticed a few folders on my kitchen table. "What's all this?" he asked, flipping one open without waiting for an answer. "Just some work stuff," I said. He skimmed the pages, his expression neutral. "This looks complicated," he said. "You're doing this on your own?" "Yes." He closed the folder and set it back down. "You might want to be careful," he added. "There are a lot of scams out there targeting people who aren't familiar with this kind of thing." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear him, because I knew what he was really saying. "You don't understand this." I let him think that. It was easier, and it gave me space. The more he believed I was still in the same place, the less he interfered. So I didn't correct him. I didn't explain what I was actually doing. I didn't tell him about the equity, or the meetings, or the decisions that now had my name attached to them. That wasn't secrecy. It was protection. Not from him, from the version of the situation he would try to create if he knew. Because I had seen that pattern before. Offer help, take over, reframe it as necessary. And suddenly something that belonged to me would feel like a shared decision. I wasn't willing to do that again. Not this time. As the years passed, the company stabilized. Not dramatically, just consistently. Revenue grew, systems improved, fewer surprises. Eleanor didn't celebrate small wins. She just kept building. So did I. There was one moment that stayed with me. We were reviewing quarterly numbers, and for the first time, everything lined up cleanly. No gaps, no corrections needed. Eleanor looked at the report, then at me. "This is solid," she said. I nodded. She leaned back in her chair. "You know," she added, "most people would have made this look better than it is. Smooth things over. You didn't." "That wouldn't help," I said. "No," she agreed. "It wouldn't." That was it. No praise. No speech. Just acknowledgement. It meant more than anything Jason had ever said about being good with money. Because it wasn't based on assumption. It was based on what I had actually done. Back at the table, Jason shifted again, his patience wearing thinner. "You're being very calm about something that doesn't add up," he said. I looked at him. "I've had time to understand it," I replied. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do," he said. "Understand it." I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "You're trying to fit it into something you already believe." He frowned. "What does that even mean?" I held his gaze for a moment. "It means you're not asking what happened," I said. "You're asking how it's possible." Jason opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. That landed. Not because it was complicated. Because it was accurate. He wasn't looking for information. He was looking for confirmation that his assumptions still worked. And they didn't. Not anymore. He leaned back slowly, studying me again like he was seeing something unfamiliar. "You're not telling me everything," he said. I didn't argue that. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I owed him the full picture. Not to prove anything. Not to make him comfortable. Just to keep what was mine. I adjusted my glass slightly on the table, lining it up with the edge like I'd done 100 times before. Jason noticed everything when he was trying to regain control. "You're leaving things out," he said. "I'm choosing what matters," I replied. That answer didn't satisfy him. It wasn't supposed to, because the part he wanted, the full breakdown, the numbers, the timeline, that wasn't what this was about anymore. The real shift had already happened long before this dinner, and it didn't come with a big moment. It came in a series of quiet confirmations that things were no longer fragile. Clearview didn't explode into success. It stabilized. That was the difference. The kind of growth that doesn't make headlines but makes investors pay attention. Consistent revenue. Clean reporting. No surprises in the numbers. That last part mattered more than anything. Companies fail all the time because what looks good on paper doesn't hold up when someone takes a closer look. We didn't have that problem because I didn't let us. Every expense tracked. Every projection realistic. Every risk accounted for. No smoothing. No guessing. Just accuracy. That's what changed everything. The first time Eleanor mentioned that a larger firm had reached out, it didn't feel like a breakthrough. It felt like another thing to evaluate. "They want to take a closer look," she said, sliding a summary across the table. "Then they will," I replied. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. If the numbers held, it didn't matter who was asking. If they didn't, it wouldn't go anywhere. That was always the standard. Weeks turned into months, meetings, reviews, more questions than answers. Due diligence. That's what they call it. It sounds formal. What it really means is this: they try to find every reason not to move forward, every weakness, every inconsistency, every place where something doesn't add up. I had seen it before from the outside. This time I was inside it, and there was nothing to fix. That was the difference. One afternoon, after another round of reviews, Eleanor walked into my office and closed the door behind her. "They're serious," she said. I nodded. "They've been serious for a while?" She gave a small smile. "Yeah, but now they're moving." She didn't need to say what that meant. It meant numbers. Real ones, not projections, not possibilities, actual terms. The offer came in cleaner than I expected. Not inflated, not complicated. Fair. That was rare. I went through it line by line, not because I didn't trust them, because this was the moment where small details mattered the most. Equity percentages, payout structure, tax implications, everything Jason would have turned into a long explanation. I didn't need one. I understood exactly what I was looking at. When it was finalized, Eleanor didn't celebrate. She just sat back in her chair and exhaled. "That's it," she said. I nodded. That's it. There wasn't a moment where everything changed. No phone call I had to take twice to believe. Just numbers on a page that were now real. After taxes, after adjustments, after everything was accounted for, it was just over 5 million. I didn't react. Not the way people expect. No shock, no excitement. Just a quiet pause. Because the number wasn't the most important part. What it represented was, for the first time in years, I wasn't operating inside someone else's expectations. I wasn't asking for approval. I wasn't adjusting my decisions to avoid being corrected. I had done something that existed entirely outside of that system, and that changed where I stood. Not just financially, personally. I set up a meeting with a financial advisor the following week. Not Jason, someone who didn't already have an opinion about what I should do. We went through everything: investment structure, long-term planning, risk management. He asked questions, clear ones, without assumptions. That alone made the conversation easier. "Do you want to maintain your current lifestyle?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Do you want to make any large changes?" "No." He nodded. "Then we build around that. Simple. No pressure to expand. No suggestion that I needed to optimize everything. Just options." I opened a new account, structured the funds, set aside what I needed, invested carefully. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would change how my life looked from the outside. That part was intentional, because I knew exactly what would happen if Jason noticed. It wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a takeover. Advice first, then involvement, then control. I had seen that pattern too many times, so I didn't mention it. Not to hide it, to keep it from being redefined. Back at the table, Jason leaned forward again, his voice sharper now. "You're making decisions at this level and you didn't think to include me." There it was. Include. I looked at him for a moment, carefully. "You're not part of this," I said. That landed harder than anything else I had said so far. Brittany looked up, quickly surprised. Jason blinked once, like he hadn't heard me correctly. "What? You're not part of this," I repeated. His expression changed. Not confusion this time. Something else. Something tighter. More personal? "I'm your son," he said. I nodded. "Yes, you are. And you didn't think I should be involved?" That word again. Involved. I rested my hands on the table steady. "No," I said. Jason stared at me, searching for something to push against, something to correct. But there wasn't anything left to adjust, because this wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about position, and for the first time, mine wasn't below his. Jason stayed standing for a second longer than necessary, like sitting back down would mean accepting something he wasn't ready to accept. Then he slowly lowered himself into his chair again. Not relaxed, just contained. "This doesn't make sense," he said, quieter now but tighter. I didn't respond. He looked at Brittany like maybe she would say something that would pull this back into a version of reality he recognized. She didn't. Instead, she folded her hands together and looked down at the table. Jason turned back to me. "You're telling me you handled all of this," he said, "on your own?" "Yes. No help." I didn't say that. That caught his attention. "So there was someone," he said quickly. "Who?" I let the question sit for a second. "People I work with," I said. Jason frowned. "Work with," he repeated. "What work?" That word landed differently now. Not casual. Focused. The kind of question that should have been asked years ago. I looked at him. "The kind you never asked about," I said. He stared at me. "What does that mean?" "It means you were more interested in explaining things to me than listening." Jason shook his head immediately. "That's not true." "It is," I said calmly. "You never asked what I was doing. You just assumed you already knew." "That's because you never said anything." "I didn't need to," I replied. He leaned forward again, frustration building back up. That's not how communication works, Mom. No, I said, it's how assumptions work. That hit him in a different way. Not anger this time. Something closer to realization. But he pushed past it. So what is it? He asked. What exactly have you been doing? I looked at my glass again, then back at him. I've been working, I said. That doesn't explain this. He snapped, gesturing slightly toward my phone. It explains all of it, I replied. Jason let out a sharp breath. You're talking like this just happened, he said. Like you just quietly built up millions of dollars and never thought it was worth mentioning. I tilted my head slightly. Would it have mattered? He froze. What? If I had told you, I continued, would you have listened or would you have told me what I was doing wrong? Jason opened his mouth then paused. That was the first time he hesitated like that, because he didn't have a clean answer. I would have helped you, he said finally. I didn't need help. You don't know that. I do. That was the moment his composure slipped again. Not loudly, but clearly. You don't just decide that, like he said. That's not how things work. That's exactly how it works, I replied. Jason pushed his chair back slightly again, his movements sharper now. This is unbelievable, he muttered. No one at the table interrupted. No one stepped in, because at this point it wasn't about money anymore. It was about something much harder to adjust. Jason looked at me again more carefully this time. 5 million? He asked. After taxes, I said. His expression shifted again. He wasn't just hearing the number now. He was processing it, breaking it down, comparing it against himself, against everything he thought he knew. You're serious? He said. Yes, and you've just been sitting on that. I've been managing it. That's not the same thing. It is when it's yours. Jason leaned forward one last time, his voice lower now, but sharper. You made me look like I didn't know what I was talking about, he said. I held his gaze. That wasn't my goal. That's what happened. No, I said. That's what you're feeling. That landed, because it was accurate. Jason wasn't upset about the money. He was upset about what it exposed. The gap between what he believed and what was actually true. He sat back again, quieter now. For the first time that night, he didn't have something immediate to say. Brittany finally spoke, her voice softer than before. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. Not accusing. Just asking. I looked at her, then at Jason, and I answered honestly. Because it wouldn't have stayed mine, I said. Jason frowned. What does that mean? It means it would have become a conversation, I said. Then a discussion, then a plan. And eventually something I needed approval on. That's not fair, he said quickly. It's accurate. He shook his head again, but there was less certainty behind it now. I've always been trying to do what's best for you, he said. I know, I replied. That caught him off guard. You do? Yes. Then why? Because what you think is best, I said, isn't always what I choose. That was the clearest line I had drawn all night. Jason looked at me like he was seeing something he hadn't accounted for. Not just the situation. Me. As if the version of me he had been working with for years didn't fully exist anymore. And he didn't know how to adjust to the one sitting across from him now. I drove home that night with the radio off. No noise, no distractions, just the sound of the road and the quiet feeling of something finally settling into place. It wasn't relief the way people expect, not excitement, not even satisfaction. It was clarity. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant staying quiet, letting things go, avoiding conflict, especially with family. It felt easier to agree to step back, to let someone else take the lead, even in my own life. But what I didn't realize was that silence doesn't just keep peace. It slowly gives away control. Not all at once, not in a way you can point to, just one decision at a time until you're no longer the one making them. That night didn't change everything overnight. Jason didn't suddenly understand me. Our relationship didn't magically fix itself. But something important did change. He saw me clearly for the first time, not as someone who needed guidance, not as someone who had fallen behind, but as someone who had made decisions, real ones, with real consequences without asking for permission. And more importantly, I saw myself that way too. That was the part that stayed with me. Because in most family revenge stories, people expect a big moment, a dramatic payoff, someone losing, someone winning. This wasn't that. No one lost anything that night. Jason didn't lose money. He didn't lose status. He just lost an assumption. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to let go of. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need to prove your worth to the people who have already decided who you are. You don't need permission to make decisions about your own life. And just because someone speaks with confidence doesn't mean they understand your situation better than you do, especially when it comes to money, independence, and your future. If you're in a place where someone else is slowly taking over your decisions, whether it feels like help or not, pay attention. Ask yourself one simple question. Are you being supported or are you being replaced? Because the difference matters more than most people realize, and it doesn't take $1 million to take your life back. It just takes one decision you make for yourself and stand by. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or controlled in your own family, then this channel is for you. We share real family revenge stories, powerful revenge stories, and honest family drama that reflects what people actually go through without filters, without exaggeration. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories that don't just entertain but make you think and sometimes make you see your own life a little differently.